By the time frost covered the ground 9 mornings out of 10, and the stock of firewood beside the barn was several logs fewer, Teague had mastered riding side saddle even without Brighton's belt, and had made a habit of riding the 2 miles to Annalie's Hill and back every evening before sunset, more often than not with Annalie riding along behind on Alice. This evening they had decided to race the horses home, with Annalie stopping every time Teague yelled, "Freeze!" so she could not capitalize on her 2-legged advantage. But when Teague started yelling every few seconds for her to stop, and laughing because it kept him several yards ahead of her, Annalie nearly stood over Alice's neck to press her to overtake him. When she passed him at a full run, she called back, "Now you freeze!" and hurled her cloak at his head, nearly knocking him off Benedict in the process. Dr. Warner was waiting on the porch when Annalie brought Alice in 15 paces ahead of Teague, but neither noticed him as they slid off their horses in the same manner. "You little cheat!" Teague tossed her cloak back to her before reaching for his crutches propped against the porch steps. "I'm a cheat!" Annalie started to wrestle one of the crutches away from him when Dr. Warner startled them both. "Teague, you have a letter." They stood still for a moment until Teague looked to Annalie to let go of his crutch. Warner handed the letter down to him. The writing on the envelope was nearly illegible, the contents having been redirected several times. The initial address had been written in pencil in a narrow, slanted script much like Teague's own. He sat down hard on a step. "It's from my brother." He tore open the cover and pulled out the letter, only 1 page after 3 years. It was dated early September, nearly 2 months old. "Teague, I am well, and father was well when last I saw him, which was 3 months ago. I was captured, the details of which are unimportant, and am now confined at Johnson's Island, Ohio. I know what you will think when you read these words, so I will forewarn you that they will not let you in to see me. I write merely to inform you of my condition here and beg your assistance in preserving my life. When I was brought here in June, I had only the shabbiest of clothing due to the hard campaigning and the necessity of the weather. I have been supplied with no other clothing these 3 months, as it seems the commandant deems superfluous any covering other than that befitting the savage. However, cold weather will be coming shortly, and I do not wish to ice over with the lake. I need a new pair of pants, a heavy shirt, underwear, stockings, and an overcoat. Any blankets you can send will be fine too. Prison policy dictates that all must be a gray material. I include my measurements below, as I have grown taller than you since last we met. I am loath to ask you for so much, knowing full well that you may deem your familial obligations to have been nullified by our last unhappy encounter. Yet while I do not apologize for my adherence to a just and noble cause, nor for my disapproval of your choice and allegiance, I do wish for some hope that, when this war is over, we may return home together, no longer enemies, but brothers. I have no one else in a position to help me, so on bended knee I humble myself to beg your mercy. But even if you feel no sympathy for a Confederate soldier, I will always call myself your brother, William Scott, Lieutenant, CSA. Teague refolded the letter and stroked his mustache while staring out at the darkening sky. When Annalie spoke, he barely glanced at her. "What is it?" she asked. He hoisted himself up by the porch rails. "I have to go." Annalie and her father followed him into the house and to the stairs. "Go where?" she insisted. "When? For how long?" Teague let out a frustrated sigh. "I don't know." "You'll need money," Warner offered more calmly. "No, sir. I'll be all right." He completed his ascension and turned toward his room. "Don't put Benedict up. I'm going into town." "Tonight?" Annalie called after him. He only shut the door to his room and sat down on his bed. There was a trunk in the wardrobe, shipped from Maryland at Warner's expense. He'd not opened it when it arrived, but simply stuck it in the back with his sword. He stared at the wardrobe doors now, knowing he'd have to swing them open in a moment, drag the trunk out onto the floor, and unlock those latches. The hinges were probably rusty, having been worked only a few times since he put the trunk in storage, to add things he sent from the field. He rose from the bed and took the key out of his desk drawer. The trunk was heavier than he remembered. It was all he could do to lift one end enough to pull it out of the wardrobe and let it crash to the floor. The pasteboard label stuck to the top had yellowed, and the printing had faded. He could barely make out the name of the storage warehouse and the inventory number, and his name and the date would not have been legible if he didn't recall signing them himself. He'd had another life in June of 1861, and opening this trunk now felt like lifting the lid off a sepulchre, so much so that he half expected to see a pile of bones inside. There was indeed death there. The remains of a cricket lay atop a moth-eaten suit of clothes his father had given him when he went away to school. Apparently the cricket had been suffocated in the midst of nibbling on a thread of embroidery that it had pulled loose from a handkerchief from Caroline. He picked up the silk fabric. The stitches of his monogram were so meticulously fine and even, nothing at all like the rude sewing strokes he'd learned to patch tears in his shirts and to hem pants by the light of a campfire. Caroline had even attempted in each corner a figure of the camellia blossoms outside his window at home. She had been 10 when she gave it to him, and told him he'd better not ever lose it. He held the handkerchief to his nose. It still smelled of Mother's perfume. Caroline had used half a bottle before Mother caught her. She said she never wanted it to lose the scent of home. Teague set the handkerchief aside and used the back of his hand to wipe his eyes. He had to stand now and light a lamp to find what he needed in the trunk. Under his old clothes, beside his school books, were 2 neat stacks of composition books, 4 years' worth of his journals. He could tell the difference between his college writing and his field writing by the condition of the covers. Half were smooth, relatively flawless, and half were blood-stained and tattered. One had no cover at all. He lifted all of them into his valise, grabbed a couple more from his desk, and opened the door, where he saw Annalee waiting with the lantern instead of more words of protest. She took the valise from him and led the way downstairs. "Keep to the road. Don't take the shortcut I showed you. I put $1 in Benny's saddlebag. It may still be light enough for you to get to town, but with no moon tonight you'll need to stay until morning. Sam would put you up at Rebecca's house, but if he's gone on a call you'll have to board at Mrs. Dockery's. But don't eat there. Her room rates are fair, but she makes up for it with the price of her meals. There's a loaf of bread in the saddlebag with a couple of potatoes, and water's free." She held his crutches while he mounted Benedict, and then tied them with the valise behind him in the saddle. "I'll see you in the morning." Wednesday, 3rd December, 1862. I don't know quite what's wrong with me, but I fear I've lost the esteem of Miss Pennin forever. I struck her yesterday. I was daydreaming again, I suppose, and I thought I was on the field the time I lost my pistol and fought fisticuffs with that North Carolinian with the bushy eyebrows that Aubrey shot from behind. I must have mistaken Miss Pennin for him. I want to see if there's some kind of medicine that'll keep me from having these dreams while I'm awake, but I don't like these doctors they brought in to take Warner's place. They act like they're suspicious of me, even though they know I'm a Union man. Warner didn't do that so much. I don't know how I can apologize to Miss Pennin for making such a bruise on her cheek. She hadn't been in our ward since this morning when she got the meal orders for Miss Mary. I suppose she's afraid.